Heard the Prime Minister set the agenda for 2010 and into the next general election. The debate of ideas has begun today in the tax area, in the conservation area, in the public services area, in the science and innovation area. And from today, Mr. Speaker, what will be just as interesting is to see how the Labour opposition position themselves with respect to many of these issues. Mr. Speaker, today we heard the Prime Minister talk about capital investment as one of the key pieces of work that the government has been undertaking. The Capital Markets Development Task Force, which was started by the Honourable Leanne Dalzell and continued by myself in the Commerce role, reported just before Christmas, and we are expecting the government to respond in some detail to that report in the very near future. Measures to promote investment in capital markets are going to be critical to that. The large piece of work around the Securities Act review, a piece of legislation that hasn't been reviewed in 35 years, Mr. Speaker, but is going to be critical for getting a savings and investment culture into our capital markets. The single economic market concept with Australia, something that I'm lucky enough to have been charged with, is likely to move into a new phase of vigour in 2010, Mr. Speaker, and I can see my colleague over there, Darren Hughes, chuckling to himself at the prospect of me having to spend a bit of time out of this chamber while we work on that agenda over the course of the next short while. This is a critical component of showing our international competitiveness, of aligning those regulatory regimes in the securities, insolvency and court proceedings areas with our Australian counterparts to ensure the free flow of capital and business transactions across the Tasman. In the justice area, 2010 brings a huge amount of work to this Parliament. Work around the simplification project for the criminal justice processes will overhaul the way the criminal justice system works, probably in the most significant fashion in a number of decades. An overhaul of legal aid and the way that operates within the justice system is also going to be a critical component of ensuring that efficiency is what drives the court system. That rather than using a debate about the court system and having that debate from the perspective of lawyers and judges and lawmakers, we have that debate through the eyes of those people who find themselves in the criminal justice system through no fault of their own. Delays that they have to experience, unusual practices which might be slightly archaic in nature, need to be looked at. The legal system, Mr. Speaker, belongs to the people of New Zealand, and it must continue to develop, it must continue to evolve as the way we practice law and the way that our justice system operates. Our legislative processes have to reflect that ongoing evolution. Alcohol, a big discussion looming in that area in 2010. Mr. Speaker, the Law Commission due to report to me at the end of March, middle of April, with a piece of work that has taken many, many months to conduct. And of course, against all of that background, two significant pieces of work around our electoral system. Legislation around the electoral finance changes that have been worked through not just by the government but with ample opportunity for the public to have a say on how those processes should fall out. And legislation dealing with a referendum on MMP also shortly to make its way here following some consultation and further discussion across the Parliament. A lot of work coming out of those areas in 2010, Mr. Speaker, but I can't leave this opportunity without making the odd comment about what we witnessed in this chamber today from Mr. Goff. Mr. Speaker, for me, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Goff started strongly enough when he stood up, and then when he started to speak, and one of the first sentences out of his mouth was, "I don't support GST." What that tells you, Mr. Speaker, is actually that there is no denying the baggage of a political career that stretches over nearly 30 years. This is the man that sat in cabinet when GST was introduced. This is the man that sat in a cabinet that increased GST. The problem with nearly 30 years of political history and baggage on one's back is one can only recreate oneself so many times. The problem with an institution like Parliament, Mr. Speaker, is we have very, very long memories. And everybody in this chamber, whether a participant at the time or a student of political history, realises and remembers Mr. Goff's critical role in those decision-making processes. But I tell you, Mr. Speaker, what I noticed most about Phil Goff's speech today, and it wasn't Phil Goff, it was Shane Jones. Mr. Speaker, I found this just fascinating, and so it begins. The odd hint dropped around the place about Mr. Jones's leadership aspirations, a quiet nod from the contender on TV on the weekend that he's interested in the job. A North and South article just out today by Guyon Espiner promoting Mr. Jones as the next Labour leader. And Mr. Speaker, I have to say, having sat through 9 years in opposition, I know the signs, Mr. Speaker. I know the signs and all the little bits that are working together, all the groundwork that's being laid. I've seen it all before, Mr. Speaker, and I have to say that the giveaway for me was that when the Labour supporters of Mr. Goff were up clapping his speech famously, I had a casual glance over to Shane Jones in this chamber, and he literally licked his lips, Mr. Speaker. He knew it was all over, and he was standing there thinking to himself, opportunity was coming his way, and everybody on this side noticed it. I tell you the other thing I noticed about the speech Mr. Goff gave today, again, it wasn't about Mr. Goff, it was about just having a bit of a surveillance over his colleagues, what they were looking like, where they were interested in. Now, Darren Hughes did his usual interested peer over the leader's shoulder act, and he's to be commended for this ongoing dramatic performance that he indulges in every set piece that Parliament has. Jacinda Ardern too looked relatively interested from the back, nodding occasionally at the odd salient point, actually the odd point that wasn't so salient. What I was interested in was some others in the blocks opposite. Clayton Cosgrove, totally disengaged from the process, had no interest in what was going on at all and what was going. Chris Carter, down in this corner, now there was an interesting case, a man desperate to be seen as useful, absolutely desperate to be seen as useful. And as Phil Goff works through his mind the components of whether to do a reshuffle or not do a reshuffle, do I have those older, more experienced MPs grumpy in the backbenches, or do I promote some younger, more thrusting characters on the other side who are keen to be involved, quietly making their cases like Charles Chauvel, battling away in complicated areas like ETS and ACC. And this is a man who thinks he's on the way up, but Phil Goff can't quite make his mind up whether he's prepared to take that risk. And poor old Chris Carter, desperate to be useful, chipping in there at every other opportunity. My old colleague there, Trevor Mallard, now clearly more interested in blogs than he is in politics. The man's sitting there on his computer reading blog entries while his leader is on his feet and responding to the Prime Minister's speech. Again, totally disengaged. But it was the action on the crossbenches that drew the government's eyes during Phil Goff's speech, and it's clear to us Mr. Jones has his path well and truly laid out, Mr. Speaker.